Welcome to part 2 of our special Insights at the Edge series on how we ended racism, realizing a new possibility in one generation. That's the title of a new book by Justin Michael Williams and Shelly Tygielski. They are here with us for part 2 of this conversation with our very special guest, Mario Van Peebles, actor, director, producer, activist. Maybe you know Mario for his directorial debut in New Jack City. He started acting professionally on the stage when he was just 11 years old, and his feature film breakout was in the movie Heartbreak Ridge with Clint Eastwood. Now, there's a lot I could say about Mario, so just stick with me here. I'm going to say a bit more. Mario's not afraid to take on subjects that challenge. He wrote, directed, produced, and starred in Armed, a psychological thriller about a good guy with easy access to meds and weapons of war. Passionate about social justice and raising eco-consciousness, Mario did a series called Mario's Green House, chronicling his family's comic attempts to go green while living in Hollywood. In the documentary space, he did the First Amendment Project for Sundance, featuring the renowned poet Amiri Baraka. He made Fair Game, which explored the prison industrial complex, and Bring Your A Game, which shares the necessary skills for young Black boys to thrive and survive. And now he's directing a new docu-series following civil rights leaders and activists in the upcoming 2024 election cycle. And we're so blessed, Mario, that you're here with us for this conversation. Thank you.
Good to be here.
I wanted to start, Mario, and ask you how you relate to this notion, which is the core premise of the book, How We Ended Racism in One Generation, how you relate to the notion of starting in the future with a vision of racism having ended and then working our way back from that point, holding out that vision.
Well, I think that, often there's a great metaphor in the book that they use where they sort of liken people's attitudes towards racism towards sort of like, moving into or inheriting an old house. And that people go, well, it's not my fault. I didn't. Those beams that are not working or this did that happen, that predated me. I had nothing to do with it. And yet you've inherited the house and have to live in it. And ultimately your kids will have to live in it. And so it's sort of one of those things where you kind of can say, yes, it's not directly my fault, but I either profit from it or I lose from it, but it affects where we are now. The French say, le plus ça change, le plus ça reste le même. The more things change, the more they stay the same. History doesn't just repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And so there's that. There's another great metaphor in the book, How We Ended Racism, that I love, which is that you can't drive forward if you're just looking in the rear view mirror. And, you've got to at some point look out the front, but you've got to know where you were before. So what I liked about the approach was the idea that we've already gotten to a place where we're clear of it. Now, having said that, within my own family, I have some very interesting dynamics. My mom is white, my dad's Black, I've got a gay aunt, I've got a Trumper aunt, I've got Asian, I've got East Indian, I've got everybody in our family tree. And so it's forced me as a human being to love with bigger arms. So what that means is that when I'm casting, like I did New Jack City, I wanted kids to say no. I made sure we had multiracial roles to say yes to. That the new Western I just did, that it's populated with everyone from, Edward James Olmos to John Carroll Lynch to Emmett Walsh to Whoopi Goldberg. So that there's a I love to paint with all the colors in my work. So I guess in some ways, in my nuclear family, we sort of ended racism, and the issues we have with each other, issues you would have with your family, your mom, your dad, all that stuff that comes with that, but it's not race-based. So in my own nuclear family, we overcame racism. as much as one can. I mean, here I wanted to share with you, if you can see it, this white woman in the middle, that's my grandmother. That's Marx. That's my mother's mother. And these people around her, these gentlemen around her, are with the NAACP. And so on the white side of my family, my grandmother went to Bryn Mawr, sued the school system in Virginia, where my mom was going to school, and saying that her white kids were not having a full education and being denied a full education because they were not allowed to go to school with kids of color. So she sued the school system and won from the white perspective. And the KKK burnt a cross on my grandmother's lawn and said, "We hope your daughters marry niggers." And she said, "Thank you, one already has." so I have some pretty radical folks on the white side and on the black side. So in my own family, generationally, as much as anyone can end anything, we sort of overcame these things and have a sense of humor with it. So I grew up not even understanding really there was different race. So in my own life, when I was a kid, I was born in Mexico, and I'll tell you why that is later. We lived all through Europe and Ibiza, and my parents were sort of hippie beatniks, pre-hippie beatnik, and they were traveling and they weren't materialistic. So I slept in the bathtub sometimes. My sister slept in the closet sometimes, and they were two young people. My dad was 26, my mom was 22, and they traveled all over the world. And so early on, what we saw was that folks in Morocco have a different concept about what the good life is, what the right life is. Every culture has their own cultural commercial about what does a good man do, what does a good woman do, what does a good kid do, and depending on the socioeconomic status of that family, et cetera, et cetera. And so I got to see early on that white folks who had a British accent looked like white folks who had an Irish accent, and yet they were at war with each other. That white folks who are from Ukraine look a lot like white folks from Russia, and yet they're at war with each other. That black folks in one tribe in Africa might look like the other tribe. There's no color difference, but they'll be at war with each other. And so as a kid seeing that early on, I saw that we had a tendency towards global tribalism. And as my dad said, no matter where you go, wherever there's people, there's poo, right? So there could be some kind of poo. When there's people, there's gonna be some kind of poo. So there's some tendency towards an ism, racism, lookism, sexism, classism. It doesn't mean you deny the existence of that ism, but you don't let it poison you personally. You recognize that if we were all purple, I'd probably be, we East Coast purple, we're the true purple, and they're West Coast purple, right? So if you keep it in perspective and don't make yourself the target of it, so that you go, this is personally against me, then I think you can see it in a holistic way that allows you to be a better healer. It's very hard to heal if people don't feel the love, and that's all people. So it's not hard for me to get to a place in my zeitgeist, if you were, where I can see that we're past racism. That doesn't mean we're necessarily better to the planet unless we apply that. It doesn't necessarily mean that our consciousness, in terms of gender differences, and now, as Dr. King said, we're doing the documentary on the King family. I mean, on the affiliates of the King family, the grantees, if you will. Dr. King has a great quote. He said, "We either learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we all perish together as fools." What Shelly and them are doing in this book is addressing that very core thing. But what can divide us if it's not race? We'll find another way until we get past our tendency for tribalism, period. So if we're all Crips, there's going to be Bloods. If we're all Irish, there's going to be British. If we're all Protestant, there's going to be Catholic. If we're going to find the my club, your club of it all. And that, I think, once you understand that perspective, go, okay, it doesn't mean we can't rise above it, but it shouldn't poison us to the point where we, as I said, we can't be good healers. That's a super long answer. You can go on many places. Sorry about that.
What it brought up for me, Mario, is I was thinking of people whose families have a lot of different members in the family, but the big arms aren't including everybody. In fact, there's, a lot of divisiveness and people within the family who are being left out and excluded, and the humor's not there. Instead, it's, war right within the family. I'm curious if you could share from what sounds like a very open and accepting and loving family environment, what you might be able to share in terms of counsel or wisdom, or how to cross the divide within families when that's not the case.
I think a big part of it, of being a parent, or being a child but especially being a parent, is trying to understand that our kids come through you and not from you. So it doesn't mean everyone speaks the same language that you do, but trying to give them the best. At Christmas, and I give Michaelo something, I don't give him what I want him to have. I try to give him the best version of what he would want. Right? So I think it's trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes, but really seeing if you can understand them, and then know that no matter how loving or understanding or how much humor you have, you're going to disappoint the people you love, and they're going to disappoint you on some level. Look, you're going to disappoint yourself. There's been times in my life where, the Mario I was is not the Mario I wanted to be, or the Mario I like to think I am. And I've tried to say, can I get the Mario that I think I am, who's over here, and the Mario I really am, to at least be in the same freaking room? So it's interesting to stand out. I think standing outside your thoughts a little bit and saying, are those thoughts really mine, or have I inherited those? Like we go back to the house metaphor, have I inherited the mold in that corner? Is that something that I really need to keep? So I think part of it is checking in with self, but opening the door for people to say, this is an issue, or how I deal with it, and then trying to see it outside of yourself, trying not to react to it as the person, that may be, perpetrating said problem, but the person that's going, oh, how can I be better at that? And then you ask yourself this, it's like if someone brought you something beautiful, but it was in a messed up wrapper, like the wrapper was just terrible. Would you throw out the beautiful gift because you didn't like the wrapper? No. But some of the lessons brought to us in an ugly way, in a way that hurts our feelings. Do you know what I mean? So if someone comes up to me and goes, and you got a booger in your nose, maybe I didn't like the way they said it, but I might check the mirror before I do my next interview. So without looking at it, then I feel, in anything, in your family, in your life, in your career, with your friend group, without looking at any of it, then I think you're locking in, you're not moving forward. And I think the minute you start to do that, probably with self first, if you start here, like as Michael said, the man in the mirror, if I can start with the man or the woman in the mirror first, then I can sort of spread it out easier.
Mario, one of the things you're saying that is, really powerful that I'm kind of really feeling with this whole element of the book is there's two sections that we talked about. And in part one of this interview with Tami, we talked about shadow work, which was really looking at the places that we're kind of othering ourselves and going unconscious, and the things in our past that are impacting our present. And then, the other piece of this that that I want to pull a thread on that you've been talking about is this concept that we have in the book called calling forward. It's like one of, I think, our favorite concepts that Shelly and I, honestly, we were shocked that we coined. Like, we started calling it calling forward, and then Shelly and I did like all this research to make sure no one else had said it, and it's really this concept around, calling out is something that we hear people do all the time, right? I'm calling this person out and naming something that they did wrong publicly, or some people will say, oh, well, it's better to call in, which is to do it privately. But what we always find is that when that's done with shame, blame, or guilt, that it actually just scientifically shuts down the centers of the brain that actually allow for any learning or growth to happen. And one of the things that I feel so inspired by the way that you're speaking is there's this sense and an understanding with everything that you're talking about of needing to be able to step back and come at people from a generous place of knowing that there's more to the story than might be in our own viewpoint. And if we can see and even just give people the benefit of the doubt that there's something that we may not understand about their viewpoint of why we think they're hitting us, quote unquote, or whatever it is, then we might be able to open the space for conversation. And I think that when we can open those spaces for conversation, it adds to a whole different thing. And so this is what calling forward in the book is all about. It's like, instead of calling out and calling in, we're calling people forward. Shelly, I don't know if you want to say anything else about calling forward before we...
Well, I just want to say, basically, if we have a log line for that, it's inviting people in to something greater. That's really what calling forward is, into a greater possibility, a better possibility.
Yeah.
All right, Mario, I have a big question for you. We're in 2050, we're in the future. We've ended racism in terms of Hollywood, filmmaking, theater. What does it look like? What's the vision? What's the big dream?
So I think for me personally, it's what I would love in the future is that we have found a way to live in harmony with this wonderful planet that we're on, this spaceship that's spinning around and hurtling around and circling the sun. That we've found a way to go, oh, wow, okay. And and there's still indigenous folks who know how to do it, but that somehow we've taken the wisdom of the ancestors and the technology of the future, and we've put those two together and said, how can we get to a place where we can live in harmony with nature? Because the future may not just be an issue of racial diversity or gender diversity. It may come down to biodiversity. We're losing entire species that we don't pay attention to. But we will get impacted at some point by it. And, as the Native Americans said, the colonizers said we inherit the land from our forefathers, which I always found funny because they weren't here. And the Native Americans said, no, we borrow it from our children. So I hope we get to a place where we are not owners of God's green earth, but great stewards of it. A place where we truly treat each other like we'd like to be treated. And a place where we have learned to live in harmony with nature and don't see ourselves as separate. That's
beautiful. That's beautiful. Mario, we talk in the book about this concept of intra-connection. So not interconnection, but intra. And so the difference really being, and this is a term that was coined by Dr. Dan Siegel, is that interconnection is there's this one organism and another organism, and they're connecting, so they're interconnected. And intra-connection is no, we're all one organism, and we're all just a piece of that one big organism that is like, there's no beginning or end to me or to you so it's this concept of this notion, and we use the term we, which is me plus we, is mui. It's like a new word, basically. So is intra-connection, right? Because really there is no me and there is no we. There's just we together. There's moi. There's just moi.
We get sold such a strong commercial growing up, whatever that, and the commercial changes every 50 years. Maybe it's even faster now. But, so back to the Frantz Fanon quote is that if the best colonizers leave behind the schools and the churches to socialize the oppressed to the oppressor's point of view, what do movies do? What does television do? What do commercials do? What does Instagram and TikTok? How does that socialize us to what we think is the right way or the good way so I think part of unpacking some of these things that we maybe aren't helpful in other folks. You're talking earlier about having the big arms with your family, is also sort of looking at what we're sold. I remember growing up as I did, traveling a lot, I saw sort of a cultural smorgasbord of humanity. So in Morocco, there was this, and if so-and-so and that, and over here, they did this. And so I sort of felt like I was at a smorgasbord, and that I wasn't beholden to just any one sort of zeitgeist. I could sort of say, well, I like that from the French do this. I like that. And then in Morocco, they kicked it like this. And then somewhere in, over here in Africa, they do this. And so I sort of didn't feel like there was only one cultural truth. And I think that's a big advantage, because you're not as, if you just grow up with McDonald's and you've never experienced Indian food and Mexican food and, Ethiopian food or, whatever it is, you don't know that these other things exist. So I think the more we get exposure to others, you can't necessarily teach people heart, but what you can give them, it can help, is exposure. And exposure is kind of right around the corner from empathy, and empathy is just down the street from heart.
Yeah. Amen. Proximity. May we all be in proximity with each other, because that'll teach us to love each other.
Mario, can you share a bit about the new docu-series following civil rights leaders and activists during the upcoming election, and how you see that contributing to this conversation of accelerating the ending of racism in our lifetime?
In this particular case, say, okay, here's the problem. Let's not spend as much energy on that, because we know the problem. We know the racism, lookism, sexism, classism, the isms are out there. Who's doing work on the ground? How's it working out? How can we help? What's the plan of action? What's the positive of this? And I think that's where I believe we'll be spending a good deal of our energies. Who's doing the work on the ground, and how does that impact our lives? And then for the viewer, how can they be a part of it? What's our call to action? And how does that see ourselves? How do we see ourselves? And there's some wonderful folks who are doing the good work, and you want to be with them. So I think that's my take on it right now. But I'm with Shelly, and I'm with and Dorothy, and I, and Jillian, and we're all doing it together. And we're a mixed bag. We're all racially different. We all have different points of view, and I think we'll grow from the process as filmmakers. But I think we'll hopefully make something that is really, really worth seeing. And right now we're calling it The Beat Goes On, but we shall see what the title will be later.